that ability to get people involved and at ground level help them to understand what's happening. That's a unique gift that I think this agency has.
This is Hourglass, the podcast for United Way of King County in Seattle. Coming up, a conversation with our new president and CEO, Blair Hamilton Taylor, who once served as chair of United Way's board of directors. We'll chat with Blair about topics including his decision to return to United Way, his time on the board, his vision for the organization, and some of his favorite words of wisdom. We'll also discuss an event celebrating the return of the annual Summer Meals Program, and we'll talk about our Community Partnership Kit offerings. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for tuning in. After a year-long search, United Way of King County turned to a familiar face for its new president and CEO. United Way's board of directors announced earlier this month that former board chair Blair Hamilton Taylor will step into the role on July 14th. A nationally recognized leader whose executive experience spans the private, public, and nonprofit sectors, Blair will be United Way's third president and CEO since 2000. The move marks a homecoming for Blair, who served on United Way's board of directors from 2016 to 2020, including as board chair from 2016 to 2017. A familiar face in King County's business and nonprofit communities, Blair currently chairs the board of the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle and serves on the advisory board of the Neurosciences Institute at the University of Washington. Blair previously served in leadership roles at Starbucks, managing global human resources, corporate responsibility, community affairs, government affairs, and global philanthropy. He also served as CEO of both the Los Angeles Urban League and President Barack Obama's My Brother's Keeper Alliance. Blair has also served in academic roles at the UCLA Anderson School of Management and most recently at Arizona State University, where he's been an executive in residence and adjunct professor of cross-sector collaboration. Hourglass recently sat down with Blair for a discussion on topics including his decision to return to United Way as president and CEO, his time on the United Way's board, his vision for the organization, and some of his favorite words of wisdom. Here's what Blair had to say.
I believe there are not a whole lot, let me put it that way, of organizations, not just in Seattle, but across the country, that work effectively across different sectors of the economy. Let me just tell you what I mean by that. I mean an ability to work across the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and the public sector effectively. And I believe that the United Way of King County is one of those organizations. Mm-hmm. And it has the ability to work across those sectors, to serve as, in many ways, as a fulcrum, as an organization that brings those sectors together to help solve problems at scale. Mm-hmm. And that last part is important, that at scale, because, you know this as well as I do, some of the problems we face need solutions at scale. Right? It's one thing and it's wonderful to help individuals, but it's another thing to try to take that to a scaled level. Mm-hmm. So I think the United Way has that ability. And what is particularly exciting for me is that matches my background. That's what I've done. I've worked across those sectors. If you look at my career, I've worked across the private, public, nonprofit sectors. I've worked on bringing those sectors together. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the combination of what the United Way, I think, has a very strong position in being able to effectuate, and my background of what I love to do, which is helping to make those sectors come together, or helping those sectors to come together to solve big systemic issues. And that's the opportunity. So when you bring those two worlds together and you ask me why I'm excited, that's it.
Great. Perfect. Outstanding. I want you to think back to a period when you served on the United Way board, and particularly as the board chair. If you had to complete this sentence, before serving on the United Way board, I was totally unaware of blank. What would blank be?
Well, let me say this. I knew of the United Way before I served on the board.
Mhm,
I worked closely with them in Los Angeles and other cities across the nation. I've always been a fan,
mhm,
even before I joined the board and chaired the board of the United Way in Seattle region, King County region. But I will say this: when I came to Seattle, I didn't know anything about Seattle. Okay, I had not lived there. I
mhm,
didn't have relatives up there. I moved up there to work for Starbucks in a senior role at Starbucks at that time,
mhm,
and that was 14 years ago. And what I would say was remarkable to me, because John Fine who's a dear friend and who was an incredible chief executive officer. Um, I met John. He introduced me to the work that was going on in King County with the United Way,
mhm,
and what I will tell you is I was amazed by the work that the organization did and does,
mhm.
and I was amazed by the impact of the work that the organization does. So it's one thing to say we're involved in all of these different things: education, housing, supporting unhoused people, working across, mentorship and elevating communities. And it's another thing to look at what the actual impact is and to be a part of that. Let me just give you a real quick example.
Mhm.
One of the things United Way was running back in 10 years ago was these enormous events for those who were unhoused.
Right.
And events took place at the stadium. Joe, you may remember some of these and incredible events. And I was, as an executive at Starbucks at the time, I went to one of these events and I was blown away. And just what these events were was, 2,000 people individuals who were homeless would show up at the stadium, and they would be ushered in by a 400-person volunteer group from corporations all across the city, who would meet them at the door individually, one by one, with a clipboard, and say, "What services do you need?" And imagine like a floor full of services. You could get mammograms. You could get an internet address. You could get a new pair of sneakers. You could get you could get veterans benefits. You could get your haircut. I mean, it's filled up with 100 different stations. And then as an individual, you're walking around with a clipboard, having a conversation with someone who was unhoused for a variety of reasons. But in that conversation, in that 45 minutes, while you meet them and say, "What services would you like?" and you check it off on your clipboard, and then you chaperone them through that day. And then you could go sit down and have lunch with them in a lunch station.
Mhm.
And so imagine what the impact of that was, because here you have corporate leaders, many of whom had, no disrespect intended
Mhm.
to any people who are in corporate America, but many of whom had never really had a conversation
Right.
with a person who happened to be a homeless individual or unhoused person. And so what happened was the demystification of homelessness, right? Where 400 senior executives and managers and people from the business world really got to understand that there, but for the grace of God, go I.
Mhm.
And you know what it did? It turned them directionally to having, whether they were, employees of Starbucks or employees of another organization, it turned them to understanding that they have to get involved in this issue, in this crisis in the city. And so that's what I mean. Like that kind of, how do you get the excitement of being engaged in solutioning across the sectors, right? Because that's what we need right now. Corporate America has a lot of resources and a lot of people and a lot of ability to impact some of these things. But there needs to be an awareness. And I saw the United Way do that. I was part of it. And that when I first went to that, I said, "We're going to sponsor this from now on."
Yeah.
Right. And we got behind it in a big way. It's just one example. So I think things like that were just real and tangible. And you could feel the impact, right? Not just to the individuals who were served, but individuals who were serving. And that bidirectional win, that ability to get people involved and at ground level help them to understand what's happening, that's a unique gift that I think this agency has.
Thanks. Now I want you to kind of think forward since then. How has the city of Seattle, King County, and its communities, and from the standpoint of successes and challenges, changed since your time on United Way's board?
Well, Joe, I love the question. I have my opinions on this. I'm sure you have yours, and I'm sure many other people have theirs.
Mm-hmm.
But let me tell you, I left the board right before the COVID thing really hit. So,
Okay.
Seattle has changed a lot. Okay. And it's changed a lot across the whole spectrum of things. But one of the things that I think Seattle has to reconcile itself to is what we just talked about.
Right.
It has to reconcile itself to a future where the sectors work together, not at cross purposes, not where one is the enemy and the others are the heroes, but where the sectors of the economy work together. And I think that, if you look at this nation right now and you look at where we've evolved, but put Seattle aside for 1 second and just think about the big picture here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you roll back the clock 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we looked to government to solve all the problems. Right? Social problems, government, the federal government, local governments were all about solving the problems. Today, I'm just going to be realistic. That's not possible.
Great.
These problems are too big for any one sector of the economy to solve. We have to think about what is the role of government? Government has a role. I'm not excluding government at all. But what is the role of the private sector? What is the role of the nonprofit sector? How do these sectors come together to solve the problems that we face today? I mean, we just talked about the unhoused population. That's one big problem. We have not even come close to solving that problem.
Exactly.
And if we think that that's a government's problem to solve, we're making a big mistake, in my opinion.
Right.
How do we get these other sectors of the economy involved, recognizing that we're in a different era, that government cannot do this alone? It means we have to invite the for-profit sector to the table. We have to engage deeply with the nonprofit and philanthropic sector. Those different sectors have to be in the room. Those different sectors have resources. They have innovators. They have capabilities that the government sector does not have.
Great.
I mean, just think about AI for a second, right? As much as we think about it as a threat, there's also a tremendous opportunity there, right? But not if it's not understood, right? Which sector has the best understanding of AI and its applications? I would argue it's not the government sector, okay? I mean, somebody may want to argue with me on that, but that's my position. So how do we think about what are those jobs? How do we skill people up? How do we train people for the jobs of the future in tech, in AI? And what does that look like? Well, you have to get the private sector involved in that because they have those jobs primarily, right? And so I'm really interested in that. And I think that has changed significantly, not just in the last few years, although I think it's accelerating, but in the last 20, 30, 40 years, it has shifted, right? And I think there has to be a recognition of that, not in a nostalgic way, oh, I wish we could go back, but in a front-footed thinking about the future way. It's exciting. Like, let's bring these sectors together and apply their talents and resources to solve the problem. And by the way, having spent a good chunk of my career in the private sector as an executive in the private sector, many of those companies are actually eager to be invited into the room. So let's take advantage of the moment we're living through, the needs of this moment, and align as much as we can. That's exciting to me. And I think that prospect is really important for Seattle.
Great. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit. And I know you talked about visiting the Seattle area for the first time. Can you talk a little bit about your background? What are some of the most vivid memories you have of growing up? What are some sports, hobbies, activities you're involved in? What are some of your favorite quotes or sayings or words to live by?
Okay, Drew. Well, first of all, I know you heard a little bit about my background.
Yes.
And what I would say, just sort of planting this seed again, is I grew up in a two-parent household. My father was a lawyer. My mom was a master's degree educated African American. Both were African Americans, and they raised five African American boys, all of whom went to college. Four of whom went on to graduate school. And I don't say that to brag. I say that because in deference to my parents. Okay. I got four kids, and every time I turn around, I say, wow, my parents really did something, because they raised kids, all those five boys, all those years ago, in the era of the 70s and 80s, and sent them on to college and universities. And that's, I have to pause and just say, parenting is so important and yet so challenging, right? And so I give them great respect. But they taught the value of education to me, and I've carried that with me in every assignment I've had. I truly believe education unlocks doors. It unlocks opportunity in this country. I don't just mean higher education, even just completing high school and, doing that as effectively as any individual can. It's critically important for one's future. They also taught some valuable lessons to me. I mean, one was, treat people with dignity and respect.
Great. Don't
be a respecter of titles, be a respecter of persons. And I've really tried to do that over the course of my career. And if you talk to my four kids, who are now mostly in their 20s, my youngest is 19, they'll talk about the Taylor family values, right? Always do your best. Always be a nice person, right? I mean, these are values that we've instilled within them since they were little kids. And hopefully they're carrying those. I think if you stop them today, they should be able to tell you what the Taylor family values are. And so we've tried to carry that torch into our next generation. My dad was famous for his quotes, and one that I always thought was kind of humorous, but some people, hopefully nobody will be offended by it. But he used to say, today, I don't think he made this up, but it was one that he recited quite often. He said, today you're a peacock, tomorrow you're a feather duster. And while that's humorous and, hopefully non-offensive, here's the way I interpreted that. All of us will have our moment. All of us will have our opportunity in this life, but life is short. It goes by really quickly, right? And you could be up on the throne and, doing great things today, and tomorrow you may not be on that throne anymore. People may not be shouting your name from the rafters, right? And so how do you take advantage of the moments that we have to do something big and do something meaningful? And for me, that's all about, how do you help other people? How do you open doors of opportunity for somebody else? Right. And so, he would say that quite often. And it stuck with me as one of my favorite quotes. And I'll just tell you, growing up, it may not be quite so visible today, but I was a 3-sport athlete. Played football, mostly football and basketball toward the end, but also baseball in high school. And when I think about that today, I think about all the aches and pains I got from it. But there's still some great memories, because sports teaches you a lot of lessons about life. Right? It really does. You get out on that gridiron, you learn about life sometimes the hard way, right? And so I was very active in that. I was also very active in the community. Growing up, sat on a teen suicide hotline, worked at community centers. Wow. And that's another value that my parents instilled in all of us at a young age, is service to other people, and how important that is to each of us individually and our future, and to make life meaningful as well. So I'll stop there, Joe, but it's a great question. And, I could talk about that for a long time, but I know we will run out of time here. So I will cause myself to pause.
Okay. But I remember when you spoke with us the other day, you did mention that you're able to pursue your passion of uplifting communities and individuals that are disenfranchised. At what point in your career or your life did you see that as your passion? And are there any anecdotes or stories of people who made you more aware of that?
Yeah, so I think I saw that very early. I think I realized that my purpose on this earth was really to figure out how to help and uplift other people. And along the way, apply whatever talents I had or developed over time toward that. And if you look at sort of the arc of my career, whether it's private sector, nonprofit sector, even my time in the public sector, it sort of bends toward that in all my jobs. I mean, even when I was in jobs, going way back into my time at Pepsi, even when I was in jobs where I didn't have that as an assignment, I was a brand manager at Pepsi Cola, and I would try to figure out how to support communities. I'd be the guy in the room would be like, well, if we gave $25,000 to this inner city school to help them with their graduation and support, and everybody in the room would be like, okay, we'll do that because you're doing well and you think it's a good thing for us to do. But that was my job, was to sell Pepsi products. It wasn't to necessarily do all of those other things, although I ended up in a job that helped me to do that. But that's been my desire. So even when I wasn't in jobs that were traditionally, the CEO of a nonprofit or chief community officer at Starbucks, I still would find a way to try to get the organization to support community. And again, I'll go back to my parents. They were servants. They were both. My dad was a school board member in New York. My mom ran for political office in the town we moved to in Westchester and won. So she was the equivalent of a city council person. And, from a very early in my life, I realized you gotta serve, number one, and you gotta take some risks. So I remember running for class president of my senior class, first election I ever ran and won. And I was putting myself out there. I'd never been a class officer. I'd never, and I actually ran a campaign based on inexperience. I was like, I'm the inexperienced candidate up here. I don't have all these 4 years of, doing all this and that in student government and everything. And people got excited about an outside sort of point of view and perspective coming in. And that, so that was my first foray in that. And then continued that in college and, some significant elected positions and appointed positions. And I think that was really instilled into me by my parents, because I watched their modeling of how do you serve? How do you care for other people? How do you go out of your way to help somebody who needs your help? And I'll just tell you, I remember in college, I'll tell this quick story. I remember in college when one of my roommates got sick, and he was in a hospital in New York. And I distinctly remember my dad just saying, let's go visit him again. Let's go visit him again. And I wanted to visit my friend, but, there were times I look at my dad like, don't we have something else we have to do? And he'd be like, no, let's go visit him again. And because that's the kind of service. It's not just about can I go out and clean up my community? It's about how do I look for opportunities to uplift other people in their most desperate or most needing moments, when they need that support the most. That's what I hope my life is about. And I'll say this, Joe, and I promise I'll stop. If you can find a job that allows you to pursue your passion, your purpose, and somebody's giving you some pay for it, and this is to all the listeners, just know that's the ultimate, because you're not really working then. You're doing what I volunteered to do work on behalf of people when I was in those jobs that didn't necessarily have that as the job description, right? And I often tell the story, if you said to, LeBron James, tomorrow you're not going to earn any more dollars for playing basketball, I can pretty much guarantee you LeBron James will be out on the court the next day, in the neighborhood, because that's what he does. That's his purpose, right? And so find your purpose and your passion. And if you can't figure out how to get the job that pays you for it, do it avocationally.
Yes.
Right. There's so many opportunities to do it avocationally outside of your work. So, Joe, I'm stopping there. I know that's not your last question. So I'm going to cut myself off again.
Good. Just two more, and it kind of traces back to so many of the things you said about education. And then you mentioned when you met with our staff about unlocking higher education and creating opportunities for a lot of unrepresented communities. And in all your time in doing that, what have been some of the biggest lessons learned?
I think the biggest lesson for me is how much untapped talent we have in this country. And by untapped, I mean incredible talent that has not yet been uh, brought into the open, into the limelight. And if you look at some of our schools, challenges they may be, inner city, rural schools across this country, and I'm not talking about this on an ethnic basis. I'm talking about this on a population, lower income population basis. We have incredible talent, but a lot of them are the person who could cure cancer is dropping out of a high school right now.
That's right.
I mean, we can't have that in this country. So I think there is a tremendous amount of unrecognized, unrealized, not activated talent that we in this century, and with the global competitive scenario that we're facing, we have to figure out how to tap that. Yeah, I tell the story often. I sat on the board of KIP LA many years ago, and I tell this story because I think it's indicative of this notion of misperception or misunderstanding about talent. And we would take would-be donors through the KIP school, and they'd get a tour of the school. KIP is a charter school, a national charter school, but they were opening it in LA, and I sat on the board. And you would take these high net worth individuals or philanthropic individuals through, and three KIP students would give them the tour of the school, and they'd show them all the work on the walls, and they'd tell them about how great KIP was, and the teachers cared about them. And then they talk about the three colleges. These are 7th and 8th graders. The three colleges that they wanted to go to and why, right? And so you go through these tours. You get out in the parking lot with a high net worth individual or philanthropic CEO or whatever it might be, and they'd say, Blair, almost consistent, say, Blair, those kids were absolutely exceptional. And I'd say, if you think they were exceptional, you kind of missed the point. They're wonderful. They're super talented, but they're not exceptional. Because when you say exceptional, it means that there aren't other kids in the neighborhood who are just like it. They're randomly selected kids from the neighborhood who we surrounded with teachers who care, with a curriculum that uplifted them, with energized staff and volunteers and board members. And guess what? They're soaring like eagles.
Right.
But don't call them exceptional, because as soon as you do that, it means that we can't replicate it. And that's not correct. So I would be a little more diplomatic than that, Joe, but not much, because that's sort of the what we have to reconcile ourselves to. We have sort of myths and mischaracterizations of the talent that we have in certain population centers or demographic areas or, lower income communities, et cetera. And I'm here to tell you that we need to figure out how to tap that talent, because it is incredible in many instances.
Great. My last question for you. People talk about these times that we live in. We need this kind of leadership for these times that we live in, and these kind of resources. If someone were to ask you, what is your vision for United Way of King County in the context of the times we live in, what would you say?
I think, we have to do what we talked about earlier. We have to be the fulcrum. We have to be the organization that helps the three main sectors of the economy, for-profit, nonprofit, public sector, come together. And we have to do that with some degree of speed and alacrity, because we could take 4 years and think about it. Okay. I'm not saying we have to rush in without a plan and a strategy, because we will design that. But ultimately, we have to be at least one of the agents that says, no, we're doing this as a team lift. And we recognize the value of each one of those three legs of the stool. And that's a unique thing. Again, that's something that I think this agency has credibility, and I hope has credibility to continue to do and has done in the past. So that's what I would say differentiates us. And then whatever programs or approaches we're going to delve into at this point. They have to be grounded in that philosophy.
Blair Taylor, United Way of King County President and CEO. Thank you so much for your time today on Hourglass.
Hey, Joe, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Appreciate you.
To learn more about United Way's leadership, log on to uwkc.org, click on About Us, and click on Leadership. To celebrate the return of the annual Summer Meals Program, families and individuals are invited to the free Summer Meal Celebration on Friday, July 17th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Highland Park Playground, located at 1100 Southwest Cloverdale Street in Seattle. The event will include free food, a bouncy house, and other kid-friendly activities. There will be free summer meal sites in King County open through the end of August. For more information, log on to freesummermeals.org. If you're a company interested in volunteering and team building, consider United Way's Community Care Kit opportunities. Community Care Kit offerings are packages loaded with essential items for King County residents based on needs identified by neighborhood-based organizations. Assembling and distributing those kits is part of a volunteer project known as Kit Builds, and we've hosted kit builds for companies and organizations in our area for more than a year. Among the organizations that have taken part in kit builds are Amazon, the Gates Foundation, PACCAR, and Microsoft. And ArenaNet and Finvari have kit builds slated for July. For information on how you can sponsor a community care kit offering opportunity, log on to uwkc.org, click on Get Involved, click on Volunteer, and under Group Volunteering, click on Learn More. At United Way of King County, we are working side by side with communities to build an equitable future for everyone. Hourglass United Way is a podcast that highlights how we and our partners spend time making a difference in our communities. Our work is made possible by generous donations from people like you. Please send all comments and suggestions about our podcast to hourglass@uwkc.org. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn via @UnitedWayKC. And to learn more about our work or to support United Way, log on to uwkc.org. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for listening. Until next time.